Exposed, the sinister secrets of prehistoric humanity's haunting survival 2.4 million years ago. Every whisper of the wind felt like a warning. Sarah's heart raced as she heard the shuffling sounds from the backyard, little Jake bursting through the door, breathless with excitement. In his small hand, he held a stone, ancient and covered in eerie hieroglyphics, fossilized memories of creatures long extinct. A chill ran down her spine. She chuckled nervously, brushing it off like dust. Just a rock, she told herself. Yet deep down, unease prickled at her skin, relentless as the shadows growing in the corners of their home, but as evening fell, that sense of dread multiplied. Flickering lights danced eerily, and the oppressive silence wrapped itself around her like a shroud. She yearned for the predictability of her nightly routine, the easy hum of home life, work, dinner, bed. She shook off the darkness creeping in around her. She had to keep her kids safe, she had to keep pushing through. The next days turned ugly fast. It started with soft, low whispers that slipped through the halls at night, like phantom footsteps. Mr. Thompson, their usually friendly neighbor, began to act strange. Sarah caught him wandering her yard at midnight, eyes wide, muttering something that sounded like jagged prayers to an unseen force. What was wrong with him? She wished she could chalk it up to an ordinary mental breakdown, but the very idea sent ice through her veins. Then, everything spiraled when Jake vanished during the neighborhood festival. A festival meant to celebrate community, laughter, and childhood innocence transformed into a nightmare. Panic washed over her as she called out his name, searching through the flurry of dancing families and festive lights. Was he hiding? The knot in her stomach twisted tighter, air slick and raw. Those once familiar faces flashed with fear, mingled with confusion. Were they hiding something? Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. With each revelation, she felt the world tilt. The whispers grew into groaning shadows, and the community she thought she knew began to reveal its grotesque underbelly. Ancient secrets of buried spirits and inexplicable disappearances twisted through lore like vines seeking victims. Traumatized minutes turned into endless hours of searching, but the neighbor's eyes shifted when she approached. The comfortable veil of suburban safety ripped away, unveiling a cold, unflinching reality. Gripping that sinister artifact, she felt its pounding weight turn to dread. Her instincts warned her the darkness lurking hadn't just snatched her son but had roots growing through her sanctuary. In a moment of pure terror, everything changed. Jake was a mere stone's throw away from danger. What if safety was an illusion, and the light wasn't a refuge but a trap? The realization shot through her, icy and unyielding. She needed to find Jake before the shadows claimed him like they had claimed so many before. It wasn't just a race against time, it was a fight against the sinister truths hidden behind friendly faces. Despair coiled around her heart as the world she trusted crumbled, leaving only questions. What entity was holding her son? And who could she trust in this chilling game of survival? The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as Sarah sprinted down the street, a blur of desperation and dread. She glared into the faces of her neighbors, once familiar, now alien. Why weren't they helping? Eyes wide, mouths drawn tight, they watched her like she was the mad one. It gnawed at her. They knew something. Had they seen Jake? Had they let him slip into that dark maw of their secrets? The whispers pooled behind her, a low hum that filled the night with a clamoring echo. Every step forward felt like stepping deeper into a nightmare. Suddenly, a shadow flickered at the corner of her eye. She swiveled, half expecting to see Jake running toward her, but instead found Mr. Thompson standing rigid at the edge of his porch, his gaze locked onto the ground. "Mr. Thompson!" she shouted, panic fueling her voice. No response. Just the creaking of wood, a constant reminder of age. "Where's my son? Have you seen him?" He lifted his head slowly, and she stumbled back at the sight of his glassy eyes, hollow and dark. "They wait for him." The words spilled from him like blood, slow and chilling. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, a shriek sharp and gut-wrenching ripped through the air. It sounded like a child, and Sarah's heart dropped. She stumbled towards the sound, every nerve ending sparking with a mix of hope and terror. She dashed down the alley, past overgrown hedges that clawed at her like hands of the past, fingers of souls lost to time. The laughter of children echoed further, mingled with odd chanting, haunting and rhythmic. She reached a clearing, and the eerie sight froze her in place. In the center, a circle of her neighbors stood, chanting in unison, their voices swelling and ebbing like a tide against the shore of her sanity. They swayed, their eyes shut tight, oblivious to her presence. In the middle of their gathering stood a stone altar, and atop it her son. "Jake!" She screamed, her voice frail against the weight of their darkness. Jake wasn't moving, but something glinted in his hand, the ancient stone he had found. The air crackled with tension as the chant escalated, vibrating through the very soil beneath her feet. She could feel it, the pull of something powerful lurking just out of sight, something ancient and hungry. Desperation clawed at her throat, and she lunged forward. "Stop! What are you doing?" The moment she broke the circle, silence fell, smothering the chant. Each neighbor turned slowly, faces pale, eyes wide with a strange, unnatural glow. "Sacrifice," one of them murmured, as if the word itself was an offering. Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "He's just a boy." "Not just a boy," another voice chimed in, it dripped with reverence. "His blood will free them." Panic surged within her as she recognized the faces, a mix of fear, desperation, and something that mirrored excitement. She was surrounded by wolves in sheep's clothing. What was this twisted ritual rooted in? And how could she save Jake from their clutches? As if in answer, the shadows around them stirred, shapes slipping out from the dark, the figures of long-forgotten ancestors, their hollow eyes resembling the void consuming her thoughts. "Jake!" She cried, but terror had immobilized her body. She was drowning in the unfolding horror. Willing herself to fight back, she reached for the stone in her pocket, its weight grounding her. What would she unleash by confronting this darkness? What if it was too late? She took a step into the unknown, her resolve solidifying like iron. "Release him." The chant began again, louder now, drowning out reason. Time rushed forward, dragging her into the abyss. A battle loomed, and in that moment, Sarah knew she was not just fighting for Jake, she was fighting for her very soul. And with that, the shadows howled, rising against her, the ancient secrets clawing their way back to the surface. What truth lay hidden in the flickering darkness, just beyond her reach? The shadows swirled like a dark vortex, engulfing Sarah as she strained against their pull. The chilling chants ascended, each word twisting in the air, wrapping around her with an icy grip. Her breath caught in her throat, a frantic pulse pounding in her ears, drowning out the terror that danced at the edge of her consciousness. She fought to focus, to piece together a plan for Jake amid the maddening chaos. The neighbors, faces pale and gaunt, began to advance toward her. Their movements were unnaturally fluid, bodies swaying, eyes sparkling with that ominous glow. In their waking trance, they were not the people she knew, but something other, something ancient that clung to the remnants of their humanity. "Sarah!" came a desperate voice from behind her, slicing through the ritualistic haze. It was Melissa, a friend, no, a former friend. "You have to run." They won't stop. "Where is Jake?" Sarah implored, whipping around to catch a glimpse of Melissa's face, which was smeared with panic and disbelief. "We have to save him." "They've taken him, Sarah. He's part of something bigger now." Melissa's eyes flickered toward the altar, and they were wide with fear, drawing Sarah's attention back to her son. Above the stone altar, Jake's small body remained eerily still. The ancient stone in his hand gleamed, pulsing with a life of its own. She remembered his laughter, his joy, the innocent wonder that used to sparkle in his eyes. But now, shadows threatened to snuff that light out, to twist it into something grotesque. As the chanting grew louder, vibrating through her bones, Sarah's heart raced with both fear and an unexpected surge of determination. She was not losing her son, not today. With a grip firm on the stone in her pocket, she fired up the embers of her defiance. It was time to confront this darkness head-on. Leave him alone, she yelled, her voice echoing against the trees. You want him? You'll have to go through me. Suddenly, a hush blanketed the crowd. All eyes turned to her, and the neighbors exchanged glances, as if sharing a secret only they understood. The glowing intensity in their eyes morphed into a cold, calculating stare. Sarah felt the air shift like a predator sizing up its prey. One neighbor, a woman with parchment-like skin, stepped forward. You speak bravely, child, but what do you truly know of sacrifice? You are naive to think you can save him from the inevitable. A chill slithered up Sarah's spine. I want to let you take him. What happens if you succeed? Nothing will happen, she sang back, voice dripping with dark allure. Everything will change. Behind her, the shadows lengthened, fingers stretching toward the altar. They twisted and congealed, their shapes swirling into grotesque figures that seemed to whisper her name, beckoning her closer. Sarah's grip tightened on the stone. It felt warm now, vibrating in sync with the rhythmic pulsing of the chant. She pictured Jake's face the way he smiled, and that image tore through her like a lifeline. I want to let you have him, she screamed, lunging toward the altar. The others surged forward, their movements a choreographed wave of horror, but Sarah was relentless. She drew power from the stone in her hand and thrust it forward, releasing the energy that pulsed within. A brilliant beam shot from the stone, splitting the dark veil around her, pushing back against the figures that clutched at her sanity. They recoiled, their chants faltering, but the very ground beneath her began to tremble. The outburst seemed to shake the realm, a terrible force awakening from its slumber, and in that violent moment, she understood the mantle of ancient powers lay over them all, and she had just ignited its fury. A sharp, ear-splitting crack echoed through the air as the shadows shrieked, twisting and recoiling in agony. But Sarah persisted, feeling both terrified and empowered. She had to pivot this tide, however impossible it felt. Jake! She cried, eyes locked on her son, who was still unmoving. Fight back. Come back to me. And then, the ground shook harder, cracks spidering beneath her feet. A sudden burst of wind howled through the clearing, ripping through the gathered neighbors, and Sarah braced herself for what would come next. Would Jake awaken from the depths of this darkness? Or would she unearth more than she bargained for? As the shadows coiled, thickening like a storm around them, Sarah braced herself for a showdown, a final struggle that blurred the lines between salvation and doom. What deeper horrors awaited as the veil of age-old secrets began to lift? The air crackled with tension, each breathing moment steeped in dread. The shadows writhed, buffeted by the wind Sarah had unwittingly conjured. They recoiled, but not for long. Their appetite for darkness was insatiable, and in the face of her newfound strength, they became feral, shifting and morphing into grotesque shapes that surrounded her. Hold on, Jake! She shouted, heart racing, trying to ignore the creeping sensation threading its way down her spine. Her voice wavered, cloaked in desperation. We're getting you out of here. A pulsing rhythm reverberated beneath her feet, clawing at the ground. The crack in the earth widened, swirling with an otherworldly light, and all around, her neighbors chanted louder, their voices merging into a haunting melody that seeped into her mind. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting to block it out, but the song was a siren-esque call, its notes sharp, beckoning her to surrender. Suddenly, the beam from the stone in her hand flickered, dimming as if weakened by the very shadows it sought to expel. Panic clawed at her throat. This was not her power, it was the stone's, something ancient, malevolent even as it surged within her. The paper-skinned woman lunged forward, fingers twisting like vines, eager to wrap around Sarah's throat. You think you're special? You've no idea of the power you play with. Sarah staggered back, but the ground twisted beneath her, and she fell to her knees. Above the altar, Jake still lay unmoving, the stone cradled in his tiny hand beginning to pulse in synchronization with the chanting. She could see the dark tendrils reach out toward him, coiling around his legs, wrapping tighter like a serpent with its prey. "Jake!" Sarah cried out, the desperation cracking her voice. The sight twisted her stomach into knots. "Fight, baby! Please!" The chanting turned frantic, resonating within her bones. Join us," it droned, and with each repetition, the shadows layered around her like a suffocating cloak. She felt their dark energy pressing in, a chaotic whisper promising ecstatic unity, freedom from suffering. It threatened to engulf her mind, the very thing she feared the most. But suddenly, a flicker of bright light erupted from the stone in her grasp. It ignited her vision, blinding and crisp, and in that flash, she saw Jake again, his smiling face, his joyful laughter. That was her son, her heart, and she wouldn't let anything corrupt that purity. She pushed herself up, strength surging through her limbs. "No!" she shouted defiantly, steering her gaze back to the neighbors, who were now frozen in place, staring agape at the fracturing ground. "You don't control him. You don't control me." The shadows recoiled as if her words were both a threat and a beacon. In that moment, her own grip on the stone steadied. The crack widened beneath her, spilling out an unfamiliar glow that began to banish the black, licking at the edges of her fears. "Let my son go," she demanded, voice stronger now, reverberating like thunder. The air thrummed with an electric charge, sending the figures around her into a frenzy. Several neighbors fell to their knees, convulsing as shadows writhed and tore at their forms, their skin cracking under the strain of loss. For a fleeting second, she thought she had the upper hand until the wind howled again. A swarm of shadowy figures emerged, larger and more menacing than before, their eyes a hellish glow catching the light. They were angry, hungry, and a wave of despair washed over her as their chilling chants transformed into a guttural roar. "Run!" shouted Melissa suddenly, her face twisted with resolve. "We need to get out of here. They'll try to take you both." But even as she spoke, an unseen force pulled at Sarah's heels, dragging her toward the altar again. With sheer determination, Sarah knelt beside Jake, grasping the small stone emulating power, pushing it toward him. "Wake up, Jake. You have to wake up." As their fingers brushed, a stark silence fell, a tense pause sweeping through the air like a predator waiting for the perfect moment. And in that moment, something shifted. The shadows twisted back, an artery of darkness swelling, coiling around them, ready to strike. What had Sarah unearthed? Would she succumb to its grasp or reclaim Jake's spirit from the threats closing in? The winds howled, the shadows thrummed, and Sarah's heart raced anew as she faced the encroaching dread. The abyss stared back, and perhaps it held the very secrets that had drawn her here. What awaited her beyond the veil? Would the truth offer liberation, or would it bind them both to a fate worse than death? The ground trembled violently beneath Sarah, the darkness swirling like a tempest. She clutched the stone, every pulse igniting in her grip. It hummed with a desperate energy, and she could feel the shadows pulling at her heart, whispering promises of power and darkness that made her blood run cold. "You don't understand," the paper-skinned woman shrieked, her voice slicing through the chaos like a blade. "You're nothing without us." The grotesque figures loomed closer, eyes gleaming like hellfire. Her neighbors dithered between mankind and wraith, trapped in a prison of their own making. Melissa wavered, her face twisted with fright, the remnants of her bravado crumbling as the shadows took shape, becoming something monstrous, something real. "Jake!" Sarah pleaded, her heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. She pushed past the terror clawing at her throat. "Please, you have to fight this." Silence erupted around her as Jake's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, the chaos paused, as if even the shadows were taken aback by his sudden consciousness. The boy's gaze met hers, bewildered but unwavering. "Mom," he whispered, frail and fragile, as if the shadows were a distance echoing from his own mind. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm here. Just hold on." A riptide of screams surged from the neighbors, their distorted forms writhing as if the very ground was alive with malevolence. They clawed at their faces, twisting in agony. The shadows seemed to drink in their despair, growing stronger, brimming with a hungry power. The wind howled, shrieking through the trees, rustling the leaves in a cacophony that signaled a dark reckoning. Sarah felt a gust push her back, an invisible force testing her resolve, threatening to rip her from Jake's side. She tightened her grip around him, summoning what strength remained. "Not today," she shouted against the gale. "You will not take him. I won't let you." Above, the full moon emerged from the clouds, casting an ethereal glow onto the chaos below. In its light, the stone in her hand flared, illuminating the darkness swirling around them. It pulsed with energy as the shadows hesitated, confusion rippling through their ranks. "Run, Sarah!" Melissa cried again, her voice a mixture of terror and urgency. "Run while you can." But where was there to run? Behind her, the crack in the earth widened, a sinister portal gaping, eager to consume all it could. She felt its pull, felt it beckoning to her, whispering sweet nothings cloaked in dread. The shadows quivered with anticipation, leaning in, hungry. Mom Jake's voice was soft, a plea that wove its way into her heart. "Fight it, Jake." The words left her mouth without thought. She pushed the stone toward him. "This is ours. Our power. Our love." The shadows recoiled, screeching as if burned. They churned in a vortex of rage, their cries a dreadful symphony that pierced the night. The paper-skinned woman's screech became a howl, crippling in its ferocity. "We will take him," she vowed, and the shadows surged, hungry, avaricious. Sarah felt the ground tremble, the energy in the air thickening with tension as both light and dark wrestled for dominance. A ripple of terror crept through her, but she pushed it down. She had to. For Jake. For their bond, forged through fire and love, they would use that to fight. Their sketchy refuge was hidden in plain sight under the screaming terror. Suddenly, a blinding flash illuminated the altar, and a surge of strength washed over her. It was as if threads of connection erupted in her mind, filling her with clarity. In that moment, she understood, the shadows were an extension of those who remained tethered, afraid, unwilling to let go. She wrapped her arms tighter around Jake, who was trembling, urging him to feel their pulse. "Together, baby." With every ounce of fierceness, she squeezed the stone, igniting the air around them like a musical note of defiance, ready to fracture through the dark. But as the shadows wavered, something darker lingered in the air, something that socialized fear the kind Sarah had just begun to unravel. All around her. The cries of the neighbors, were they truly trapped, or were they waiting for something more sinister? Would the strength of their love be enough to shield them from the relentless darkness consuming their world? The abyss beckoned with a new, sinister promise. If Sarah could reforge the connection, how far would the darkness reach to reclaim its own? And what would it cost her and Jake in the end? The shadows trembled, hungrily circling them, pulling at the edges of Sarah's resolve. She felt the stone throbbing in her grip, its pulse sinking with her heart, wrapping them in a fragile bubble of warmth amid the chilling darkness. The moonlight shimmered fervently, but it only served to enhance the malevolence lurking around them, eagerly watching their struggle. "Mom, I don't feel right." Jake's voice cracked, laced with a fear that threatened to consume him. His eyes darted, searching for a way out, a way to escape the terror closing in. "It's okay, Jake," Sarah replied, forcing a calmness she didn't feel. "Stay with me. Focus on my voice." The grotesque figures nearby froze, momentarily distracted by the intensity radiating from the stone. It was as if the shadows understood they were losing their grip, the energy ebbing away from them like a receding tide, revealing the horror that lay beneath twisted faces, flayed skin, and hollow eyes filled with despair. "Foolish girl!" the paper-skinned woman shouted. Her voice echoed like a malevolent wind, chilling Sarah bone deep. You think love can save you? You're building a castle of lies. We are your true power. In that moment, Sarah caught glimpses of truth among the chaos. Her neighbors weren't just victims, they were prisoners of their own choices, tied to the very darkness they feared. Each shriek was a clear warning they could become the shadows if they let their fear take hold, if they surrendered their humanity. Jake, look at me. Breathe. Sarah shouted, squeezing his shoulders tightly. She needed him to fight. We have to find a way to free them. They don't have to go down this path. Panic surged between them like electricity, an undeniable connection forming a barrier against the advancing darkness. The shadows recoiled farther now, hesitating. But dread coiled tightly in Sarah's chest. The ground beneath them cracked, the ominous portal growing wider, its edges pulsing with grotesque energy, a morbid heartbeat echoing around them. The longer we stay here, the weaker we become, Jake murmured, eyes wide, filled with a strange blend of terror and determination. Then we fight back. Together. With that, Jake reached out and grasped the shimmering stone. Its brightness flared, coursing through them like ice water. The shadows screamed, railed against the brilliance, but it felt good. The raw energy soared, pushing back against the dark forces. Suddenly, the fabric of reality rippled, visions of the neighbors flooded Sarah's mind. Each one was trapped in their own web of fear, struggling against mental and emotional binds. They were reaching out, they wanted to escape, but were losing hope. This has to work. Sarah cried out, channeling her resolve like fire through the stone. We aren't just fighting for us but for everyone. Let them feel our strength. The shadows convulsed, shifting like liquid night. The paper-skinned woman writhed as if her very existence was being threatened. You won't succeed. She bellowed, eyes ablaze, fury morphing her face into an unrecognizable mask. We will, Jake whimpered, but there was a steely edge creeping into his voice. The stone pulsed in rhythm with their hearts, drawing them closer. As they concentrated, Sarah suddenly felt a pull, a weakness in the shadows, a longing that twisted her insides. They were scared, too. The darkness had a heart, a desire to feed, to thrive. But what lay beneath was not just terror, but anguish that begged for understanding. Let them go. Sarah screamed, channeling every fiber of her being, as if her words could sever the ties binding their souls to the dark, but before she could feel victory surge within, the ground split, jagged teeth reaching for them with the ferocity of a tempest. Tendrils snaked up from the abyss, grabbing at Sarah's feet, pulling hard. Mom! Hold on! Jake screamed, feeling the ground shift beneath him. The shadows were clawing back, keening louder, racing toward them like an angry wave. The air buzzed with desperation as they continued battling, the very essence of dread wrapped around them. Would their combined power be enough to shatter the darkness? Or would they too become part of the abyss, claimed by fear's insatiable hunger? As the shadows began to engulf the light, Sarah felt her vision narrow, the stone vibrating violently, threatening to slip from her grasp. In that heart-stopping moment, she realized the true fight was just beginning. What had they awakened, and could their bond withstand the storm brewing beyond the brink? The ground quaked violently, the pulse of the abyss thudding beneath them like a war drum. Sarah felt herself slipping as the tendrils tightened around her ankles, coiling like snakes intent on dragging her into the depths. Panic surged, her heart hammering in sync with the stone's frantic vibrations. Jake! No! She gripped her son's hand tighter, the connection between them feeling like their last lifeline. He was straining, trying to pull her up, but his strength was faltering. The stone glowed, flickering as if the desperation around them was drawing its power away. Mom, I'm scared. Jake shouted, his voice wavering with each tremor of the earth. Shadows slithered closer, grasping hands brushing against his legs, whispering dreadful promises that rang in their ears like haunting lullabies. Fight it, Jake. Focus on me. She felt the warmth from the stone fading, dimming under the weight of their fear. It was like a battery running low, the hope within it flickering with every moment. With instinct guiding her, Sarah raised the stone high, channeling whatever energy still lingered. "You don't own us!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the silence like a bolt of lightning. The shadows recoiled momentarily, but then they surged forward, drawn to her defiance. The ground opened wider, the chasm gaping as if it lamented their persistence. The paper-skinned woman lunged forward, forcing her grotesque visage into Sarah's face. "Your spirit is nothing. You are merely flesh and bone, and we will consume you. Accept it." With newfound resolve, Sarah yelled back, "We're not in this alone. Together." Jake echoed, his grasp on the stone tightening as if his fear could be transmuted into power. The stone flared alive as their combined spirits ignited it, casting a radiant light that pushed back against the shadows. The air crackled with energy, a pulse harmonizing with their frantic hearts, and the tendrils recoiling like a burned moth. But too late. The shadows rallied, thrusting themselves forward in a frenzied wave, their fingers clawing and grasping, skimming the edges of the light, hungry for their essence. Faces of the lost melded into one another, leering and crooning their discontent, drowning out everything but despair. "Let us in!" they wailed, the sound like nails on chalkboard, clawing at Sarah's sanity. "Let us show you the truth. The bliss of surrender." She felt it, a creeping doubt, the promise of release from the turmoil of fighting back. For a moment, she felt the weight of her own fears, years of doubt pooling in her mind like shadows come to life. What if they were right? What if fighting was futile? "No!" Sarah shouted, shaking her head violently. She couldn't give in. Not now. Not ever. Jake's face was pale, filled with pain and disbelief. "Mom! Focus. We can't let them win." Nodding, Sarah met his gaze, steady as steel. "You're right. They thrive on fear. We show them courage." As if in response, the stone pulsed fiercely in their hands, wrapping them in a cocoon of light that blazed brighter than anything before. The luminous energy expanded outward, pushing back against the shadows, illuminating every horrific visage, scorching the darkness, but then crack. The ground under their feet snapped, fissures opening up, threatening to swallow them alive. Sarah's breath caught as she felt the world spin, time stretching like an elastic band. Could this be it? Were they about to be divided? "Hold on!" she yelled, but all Jake could do was grasp the stone tighter, the light dimming. "Mom, if we fall into the abyss, will we ever come back?" She locked eyes with her son, the unspoken fear sending chills down her spine. Before she could answer, an unsettling silence fell, enveloping them in an icy grip. The shadows paused, coiling as if sensing an imminent shift, the very fabric of their existence wavering at the cusp of fate. Somehow, they knew something was about to change. Either liberation or eternal darkness loomed at the edge, but would they find the strength to outshine the shadows, or would they slip through the cracks unseen, lost forever in the myriad of lost souls? What awaited them in the shadows, and how much were they willing to sacrifice to escape the approaching darkness? A deafening roar echoed from the depths, drowning out everything else. The ground trembled more violently now, as if the earth itself was in agony. Sarah tightened her grip on Jake, her heart racing faster than ever. They needed to escape, but every instinct screamed that the shadows were drawing closer, eager to snatch them into their endless night. "Mom!" Jake's voice quivered with desperation. "What if the light goes out?" The thought sent icy tendrils of fear creeping down Sarah's spine. She couldn't let that happen. Above all else, she had to maintain their hope. "It won T. Just keep holding on to me." But the shadows were relentless. They surged forward with a tenacity that left her breathless, reaching out with their ghostly hands, fingers clawing at the edges of the stone's glow. Released murmurs floated around them, ethereal threats that wrapped around Sarah's mind, promising freedom through surrender. One shadow stepped forward, its face morphing from a grotesque figure into the fleeting image of Sarah's own long-lost sister. "Why fight it, Sarah?" it whispered sweetly, sending chills across her skin. Join us. You don't need to be afraid anymore. Her sister's eyes, once so full of life, now reflected a haunting emptiness. No, she couldn't give in. But doubt began to creep in, whispering that perhaps this was their only chance at peace. Jake! Stay focused. She cried, shaking off the shadow's seductive call. Do you remember the stories I told you? About how courage saved our ancestors in the darkest of times? Yes. He shouted between tremors, his voice clinging to hope. But what if we're just a part of the stories now? His question hit hard. Were they merely echoing the legends that had been passed down, destined to become the stories of another lost generation? The cavern around them seemed to pulse with anticipation as if feeding on their doubts. Not if we keep fighting. Sarah shouted, her resolve renewed. She raised the glowing stone higher, feeling its warmth surging back. The shadows shied away but rallied together, morphed faces contorting in rage and despair. The ground cracked again, a violent rupture that sent ripples through the air. The chasm widened ominously, threatening to swallow up everything in its path. Mom! Jake gasped as the light flickered dangerously. Sarah's throat tightened. Hold on, Jake. We have to channel everything into this light. There was a pulse, a shared heartbeat between mother and son as they focused on the energy coursing from the stone. The warmth enveloped them, pushing against the encroaching darkness. They could feel their spirits amalgamating with the light as if it was a lifeline tethering them to existence, but even so, the shadows surged forward relentlessly. Let us show you bliss, they hissed in unison, their eerie voices weaving in and out like a twisted chorus. It is not too late to surrender. Your resistance is futile. Don't listen to them. Sarah screamed, fighting back tears. Remember who we are. A blinding surge erupted from the stone. The shadows recoiled, but new sinuous forms slipped through towering figures from their worst nightmares. Familiar faces twisted into grotesque parodies, pulling them into memories Jane had long buried. Let it all go, they crooned, their voices slithering through the air, and drown in the acceptance. The earth beneath their feet trembled again, fissures opening wider, threatening to swallow them whole. In that moment, Sarah understood the choice they faced: surrender and become part of the darkness, or risk everything for a chance at survival. But Jake's voice broke through the chaos, determined. Mom, I believe in us. We can't give up. With her heart pounding against her ribs, Sarah steeled herself. They were not alone in this fight. They had to embrace the fear and turn it into strength. Let us do this together. She yelled, determination flooding her veins as she plunged deeper into the light, ready to face whatever came next. But just as the light reached its zenith, a chilling howl erupted from below. The shadows twisted, coiling around them. Like a vice, preparing to pull them into the void. Would they harness the light's power and break free, or would they succumb to the darkness that had waited so long for this moment? The echoes of the abyss seemed to close in, hungry for their despair. What would they have to sacrifice to stay in the light? The shadows lunged, wild and chaotic, as if the darkness itself was alive and desperate. Sarah felt the cold tendrils wrapping around her, pulling at her limbs, and feared she might be torn apart. She clutched the stone tighter, the warmth radiating through her fingers like a defiant heartbeat against the encroaching dark. Don't let go. Jake shouted, his voice straining under the weight of despair. But just as the words left his lips, the light began to flicker and dim. The stone's glow pulsed irregularly, mirroring Sarah's own panic. They were losing it. Hold it. Focus on it. She yelled back, forcing herself to think clearly. Desperation seeped into her voice, amplifying every word. Don't let fear take it from us. The shadows writhed hungrily around them, their whispers growing into a cacophony, a chaotic melody that promised safety, acceptance, and an end to pain. Why continue this fight? Come to us, it will be easier. The words slithered into Sarah's mind, a sickly sweet temptation that clawed at her consciousness, but in that same whirlwind of dark temptation, she noticed Jake's face etched with fear yet resolute. There was still light in his eyes, a beacon that reminded her of what they were fighting for. Not just survival, but existence itself. "Breathe, Jake," she commanded, trying to ground them both. "We can't let them win." As the shadows clawed at their feet, trying to drag them down, a flicker of hope ignited within her. She remembered the stories, the tales of resilience etched into her family's history. And with that recollection came an idea: they had to become part of the light, fully surrender to its essence. "I need you to close your eyes, Jake. Trust me," she urged, feeling defiance swell in her chest. "Let the light in and think of everything you love." Jake hesitated, but she could see the shift in him. His fears were battling her words, but she could feel him nod slightly. That flicker was enough to reignite her own resolve. They both squeezed their eyes shut tightly, focusing inward, reaching beyond the horror. Images glimmered: a cozy kitchen where they baked cookies, laughter ringing from backyard barbecues, the warmth of the sun on their faces. Each memory, a light piercing the gloom. "Now!" Sarah shouted, tightening her grip on the stone, focusing on the palpable warmth radiating from it. They poured every ounce of that love, those memories, straight into the glowing core. A fierce light erupted, bursting forth like a sun rising in the darkest night. The shadows shrieked, recoiling from the overpowering brilliance, their forms distorting and splitting apart in the searing blaze. For a heartbeat, they felt weightless, expansive, as if they were all that ever existed: light, love, and warmth. But that fleeting moment crashed back to reality when the earth quaked violently again, shattering the utopia they had created. "Mom! It's cracking!" Jake gasped, his eyes wide with terror. They looked down, witnessing the chasm yawning beneath them, threatening to consume everything. "Brace yourself!" Sarah shouted as a massive tremor shook them. The shadows were regrouping, forming more vicious shapes, their cries wrapping around her like chains. Panic threatened to swallow her whole as she struggled to keep them from falling. She could feel a dark power rising, feeding on despair as the abyss roared back to life. Just then, a vision pierced through her mind, a fleeting glimpse of salvation in the shape of a distant door glowing in the dark. They could escape. "Jake, we have to run." The urgency in her voice cut through the chaos. "To the light." Yet as they pivoted to escape, the shadows lashed out. A ghostly hand clawed at Jake, grasping at his shirt, pulling him back into the void. "Mom!" he screamed, terror cracking his voice as fear enveloped him. "No!" Sarah lunged forward, arms outstretched, her heart screaming as she reached for him. It was a moment hanging in the balance: would they slip through the chasm, or find their way to the light beyond? Desperation surged. In her mind, Sarah whispered promises, visions of what they could be, and held on to hope. They had come too far, they couldn't let it end here. But just as she grasped Jake's hand, the shadows surged forward, eclipsing everything: the light, the memories, their very existence. What sacrifices would they now have to make, and who would they leave behind in this eternal fight for survival? The darkness waited, hungry and patient, and the door was closing fast. The world spun as the shadows lunged, clawing at Sarah and Jake's very essence. With every heartbeat, the void threatened to swallow them whole. Sarah felt Jake slipping, his little fingers trembling against her grip. "I want to let go," she shouted through gritted teeth, her voice a thunderous roar against the chilling whispers of surrender that beckoned from the abyss. They hurtled towards that glowing door, a beacon representing everything they fought for, memories swirling around them like falling leaves in autumn, warm and bright despite the chaos surrounding them. Each glimpse of laughter, every cherished moment surged within her, a lifeline tethering them to hope. She steeled herself against the encroaching dark. "We have to reach it, Jake. Just a few more steps." With the flickering light pulsating from the stone, Sarah sensed a shift beneath her feet as the shadows recoiled, momentarily stunned by the brightness emanating from them. The neighbors once so familiar stood around them swirling in agony, caught in their plight between wanting to be saved and the allure of darkness. But she couldn't afford to think of them. Not now. Not when Jake needed her. "Mom, it's getting darker." Jake whimpered, fear knitting its way across his features. "Focus on what we love, Jake." Sarah cried back, feeling her heart swell even as it threatened to shatter. "Remember our camping trips? The marshmallows and stories by the fire?" "Yes, I remember." He gasped. "Then pull that light into your heart. We're stronger together." She squeezed the stone, its warmth flooding into her veins, electrifying her spirit like radiant sunlight bursting through thunderclouds. In that moment, she felt Jake's grip tighten around hers. His small voice lifted above the whispers, merging with hers. "I believe in our love. Together." The glow from the stone flared even brighter, illuminating the shadows that clawed at them, sending tendrils of darkness slinking away like frightened mice. Suddenly, the chasm beneath them roared, eager to reclaim them. Yet they surged forward, feet pounding against the trembling ground. The door was close, glimmering with the promise of safety, of home. "Mom, look!" Jake pointed with wide eyes, his face painted with disbelief and determination. There was a figure emerging from the light, tall, warm, and somehow familiar. From within the glow stepped Sarah's sister, long lost to the shadows of their past. "Sarah." "Jake. Keep going. You have to push through." Her voice was a soothing balm on Sarah's fraying nerves. Then, with a heart-wrenching scream, the shadows lunged once more. Their twisted forms spiraled, tearing at the air in a frenzy, desperate to pull them back. "You can't leave us," shrieked the paper-skinned woman, contorted with fury and grief. "You've been chosen." "No." Sarah shouted, channeling all her fear, all her love, into that radiant stone. "We choose our own destiny." It pulsed furiously, igniting a fierce light that sliced through the encroaching darkness. The figures surrounding them shrieked, contorting in agony as the light expanded, crashing like waves against the shadows. "No. You don't understand." The woman howled in despair, her voice fading into echoes. "Let go." Sarah cried anew, urging Jake to keep moving. They drew closer to the exit, the light enveloping them, wrapping around their souls. Jake's footsteps faltered for just a moment, panic snapping at his heels. "Mom, I can't. They're pulling me back." "Stay close," she shouted, pulling him forward. "Just a little further." The shadows clawed at Jake with desperate fingers, dull whispers tempting him to surrender, to follow them back. But Sarah could feel the strength coursing through them, the light battling against the despair threatening to pull them apart. With a final burst of power, she heard at Jake's joyful laughter, a sound stronger than any fear. "We're free!" he shouted. Suddenly, they burst through the door, tumbling into a world bathed in light, the shadows hissing at their retreat. The weight of the darkness fell behind them with a crash, reverberating as if the very earth exhaled relief. Breathless, Sarah and Jake stumbled into an open meadow, sunlight pouring down like liquid gold, washing over them, cleansing the remnants of that terrible night. There were no figures here. No whispers clawing at their sanity. Just as they began to breathe again, the air shifted, and they turned to see Sarah's sister emerging from the light, less haunting now, free from the shadows of despair. "I've waited for so long, Sarah," she smiled gently, embracing them both. "You saved him. You broke the curse." Sarah blinked, the joy blooming in her chest mingled with sorrow. "I'm so glad you're here with us," she whispered, tears streaming. In that gentle embrace, they understood, they had faced the darkness together and waged a battle not just for survival, but for love and connection. "I love you, Mom," Jake whispered, snuggling into her side, the warmth of their bond wrapping around them like the softest blanket. As they stood in that metasweet radiance, Sarah knew they were safe. Light had triumphed over dark, and together they formed new beginnings, while the shadows faded into mere whispers of the past. But deep down, she also understood how the world required vigilance. It was their bond, their fierce love that shielded them from the depths. Sarah looked at Jake, contentment spreading in her chest. They would carry that strength with them, whatever came next. They were family, and nothing could sever that connection again. As the sun cast a golden glow, she sighed with relief, taking in the beauty around them. They had made it, and now, they would cherish every moment, and as they turned towards the future, the world shimmered with endless possibilities ahead. Subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive stories. Smash the like button now to support the algorithm and fuel the content you love. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this ending. Your voice matters. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to show your support. Every action counts.